listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast. Today we're going to be counting down our top 10 horror films of 2021. We know we're a little bit late, but we wanted to make sure that we got as many of these titles in as possible so these lists could be authentic, so they could count. Because I'm a firm believer that you should not be making a top 10 horror movies list of the year if you've only seen 20 or 30 films. We're each going to give our honorable mentions list, and then we'll launch into our top 10.
Once again, I can't believe this is on my honorable mentions list. I'm going to say one of them is 3 films, the Fear Street trilogy. It's written and directed by Lee Janiak. She did Honeymoon 14 and did 2 episodes of Scream. Additional story credit by Kyle Killen. He did Scenic Route with Josh Duhamel, and it's based on R.L. Stine's Fear Street books. So all 3 movies are great, some better than others, but a very impressive trilogy and a very impressive project for this Lee Janiak, and she's going to do great things in this genre.
I like all of them, but none of them made my honorable mentions. I actually counted them as 3 separate films on my list.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so all 3 of those are one of my honorable mentions. The next honorable mention I just watched last week, The Night House.
Really good.
With Rebecca Hall, yes. And she does some really good slow burns. Like, she did The Awakening a couple of years ago. That was a really good slow burn, but I think this one's even better. It's a slow burn dramatic horror film, but I thought the atmosphere was really original. There's something different about it. I need to watch it a couple more times to really nail it down, but there's something really different and unique about it.
I really enjoyed that one. I thought it was a very nuanced and thoughtful horror film. And alas, it's not even in my honorable mentions, and I really enjoyed it, which tells you how good the year was.
Yeah. And then one that I was sure was going to make my top 10 is Old, M. Night Shyamalan. I was pleasantly surprised by it. The star of Last Night in Soho, this was another one of her horror movies of the year. I thought it was well crafted. I thought it was original, emotional. I applaud M. Night Shyamalan for, continuing to do things different, to shake things up and shake up people's expectations.
For me, it's a film that I respected more than I enjoyed. I thought it was a very ballsy movie, and it was very original, and I liked it up to a point. I didn't care for the twist, and it got a little repetitive for me after a while with the scenarios. But I see what people loved about it. It's probably one of the most bold and original films of the year.
One I cannot believe is on my honorable mentions list. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I actually liked it a lot. Not quite as good as James Wan's Conjuring films, but it wasn't good enough to make my top 10 list. Really good, though. My last honorable mention, and I just wanted to go over one film after this one. This is my 5th honorable mention, would be Son. Another creepy kid movie. I thought it did something original with the creepy kid concept. I thought it was well crafted, had some originality to it. It could have been another cookie cutter creepy kid movie, but I thought it kind of stood out.
Between this and Halloween Kills, Andy Matichik is really becoming a star in the genre.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's who that was. Andy Matichik.
Halloween Kills.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing and didn't even realize it was her till you said something.
No, that is her. I kept looking at her and thinking when I was watching it, I had to pause halfway through because it's like, okay, I'm getting tired of this. I don't like knowing I know who this person is and I've seen them and I know recently and I checked. I'm like, oh, from Halloween and Halloween Kills. That's where she's from. Okay, cool.
Now, I'm really neurotic about this next one. It's The Deeper You Dig. It's from 2019, but it was actually released in 2020, and I found it on a couple people's best of 2021 lists. I guess because it was just available on Shudder in 2021, but I can't include it on my list. It was on number 7 on my list.
Okay, so I actually skipped over that film just when I was trying to get in as many as possible for the specific reason when I looked into the release date and everything. I was like, this has to count as a 2020, not as a 2021 film. So I skipped
Yeah,
that one for that reason.
I actually spent about an hour on it, looking around trying to find an excuse to include it on my 2021 list, but I couldn't. It was definitely released in 2020, but I have to. It was meant to be my number 7, so I just have to just mention it real quick, just what it's about and everything, so people are aware of it. Now, I would like to talk about it on a later podcast when you watch it. It's written and directed and starring John Adams and Toby Poser. The cinematography is both by John Adams and his daughter Zelda Adams, and the score is done and it's edited by John Adams. So it's a family affair. It's a father and a mother and a daughter, and they did pretty much everything. They star in it, did the score, edited it, wrote it, directed it, and it is really a very effective horror film. Very low budget, but a lot of imagination. Here's a quick synopsis. Ivy and Echo are not your typical mother-daughter team. Ivy, once an intuitive psychic, makes an easy buck as a bogus tarot card reader. 14-year-old Echo likes old-timey music, hunting, and black lipstick. When reclusive Kurt moves down the road to restore an abandoned farmhouse, an accident leads to Echo's murder, and suddenly 3 lives collide in mysterious and wicked ways. Kurt assumes he can hide his secret under the ground, but Echo burrows into his head until he can feel her in his bones. As she haunts his every move, trying to reach her mother from beyond, Ivy must dig deep to see the signs and prove that love won't stay buried. This is just my type of movie. The mother and daughter feel real because they are. We get 15 minutes with them before the daughter dies, but you still get a very good idea of this relationship between the mother and daughter. The tension is thick as the mother gets closer to the truth. Her plight is riveting. I loved every second of it. The dead daughter taunts the stranger while appearing to her mom back and forth. It's all dramatic and tense, suspenseful, emotional, cinematic. It shows creativity and excellent storytelling on a clearly small budget. So check out this movie. It's available on Amazon Prime and on Shudder. If I'd have watched it in 2020, I would have included it in my 2020, and I wanted it to be number 7 this year, but I missed out on that one. See, this is why I'm neurotic about these lists. I'm beating myself up because I missed this one last year so bad that I had to add it this year.
Okay, cool. So I'll have to check that out sometimes. So kicking off my top 5, I have The Old Ways, which is Mexican horror film, kind of a Mexican folk horror film. Very good movie. I mean, obviously the representation is nice, but representation doesn't really mean anything if the movie itself isn't good and if it doesn't feel authentic. And this movie I enjoyed a lot. I thought it was a very original take on possession and addiction. Really enjoyed this one. This one is directed by Christopher Allender. My number 14 is There's Someone Inside Your House, a slasher film from director Patrick Brice, the director of Creep and Creep 2.
Oh, I didn't get to that one. I definitely would have watched it if I'd known it was Patrick Brice. Damn it.
Okay, see, that one on my list, I think I saw almost everything on the list except for 2 movies. But the reason I actually saw this one early on, and the main reason is when I was looking through and I was examining, all the details of these movies, I saw that Patrick Brice directed it. So that became a priority as soon as I saw who the director was. It's not as good as the Creep movies, just to be clear, but it's a very good slasher movie. Very modernized take on the teen high school slasher. This could have been in my top 10 if the ending weren't so on the nose. It's one of those movies that has political underpinnings, which I know a lot of people don't like in horror, but I'm completely okay with, and I thought this one had some good themes. However, I must say at the end, it became a little bit too on the nose, where in a way that people who don't like political films or politics in their movies are going to get really irritated. And even if you do, you'll probably still think it's a little too on the nose. So if it wasn't for that, could have made my top 10, but I liked it a lot. My number 13, I'm surprised this didn't make it because I was sure this was going to be like a top 10 when I saw it, was The Queen of Black Magic, Indonesian horror film. This is intense. It's fucked up. It's wrong. It's a remake of a classic 70s Indonesian horror film, The Queen of Black Magic, which is both of them are available on Shudder, so I'm gonna have to check out the original sometime soon. Directed by Kimo Stemboyle. It's about families returning to an orphanage, a bunch of men returning to an orphanage, bringing their families where they grew up. And it goes to some really sick, messed up places that you cannot imagine an American film ever going, at least in my opinion. Um, Number 12. Did you see The Queen of Black Magic?
Yeah, I didn't see the original yet, but that remake was really good.
Yeah, I haven't seen the original, but I got to check it out. My number 12 movie was The Vigil. The synopsis of this one is a man providing overnight watch to a deceased member of his former Orthodox Jewish community finds himself opposite a malevolent entity. I like this one a lot. You don't really see very much Jewish horror. You see a lot of Christian-based horror and a lot of religious-based horror is such a common thing, and most of it's like Christian-based. I think this might have been the first horror movie, and I hate to admit that I ever saw that dealt with Jewish mythology as the core of the horror. I liked it a lot, and most of all, I liked the central performance by Dave Davis. Really creepy movie. My number 11. This was really hard for me to keep off. Was The Empty Man. It's original. It's engrossing. It doesn't feel like it fits into any simple category of horror. It feels like it could be what you would deem elevated horror, but I don't really think that's right. You could call it a slasher or a ghost story. I don't really think that's right either. It sort of carves out its own little niche, and I could see why it didn't do good at the box office. But I've noticed it's becoming a cult film pretty quick, and I really dug it. The Empty Man.
Spoiler alert, that one's going to come up later on my list.
Yeah.
My number 10 is a bit divisive. It's actually more divisive than I thought it was going to be among horror fans. Antlers from 2021. Some have a problem with the pacing of it. I had no problem with the pacing of it, and some had the problem with a Native American folklore creature, the Wendigo, being sick on white people. So some people had problems with that. I didn't have a problem with that either. Antlers is directed by Scott Cooper. This is his first horror film. He actually did Crazy Heart, a really good drama with Jeff Bridges, and also Black Mass with Johnny Depp. It's written by Henry Chasen and Nick Antosca. And Nick Antosca actually wrote a bunch of episodes of Channel Zero and The Act with Patricia Arquette, the Hannibal series, and also The Forest. It's based on a short story, Quiet Boy, by the director Scott Cooper. So that was interesting that the director wrote the short story himself. It stars Kerry Russell from Dark Skies and The Americans as Julia Meadows, the teacher. Jesse Plemons from Breaking Bad, The Irishman, Power of the Dog. It just came out this year. And he's going to be in the upcoming film Killers of the Flower Moon with Leonardo DiCaprio, Brendan Fraser, and Robert De Niro. It's a Scorsese film.
He's in everything right now.
I know, right? All these great directors are picking him up.
Yeah.
So he plays Paul Meadows, the sheriff, and the brother of Julia. Jeremy T. Thomas is the standout in this. He's the little kid. This is his first feature. I couldn't believe it was his first feature. He looks like he has a lot of movies under his belt, but this is his first one. He plays Lucas Weaver. And then Graham Greene, the Native American actor who has 169 credits to his name, including Green Mile and Dances with Wolves. He plays Warren Stokes. He's the one that informs them that the creature that's after them is indeed the Wendigo. The synopsis is, in an isolated Oregon town, a middle school teacher and her brother, who's the sheriff, become entangled with an enigmatic student with dark family secrets that lead to an encounter with the ancestral creature, the Wendigo. For me, it was equal parts riveting drama thriller about a troubled young boy and a teacher trying to help him with his home life. And it's mixed with a moody, well-crafted, atmospheric monster movie. Phenomenal acting, especially from that little boy. The monster is well designed and very well shot. The real fear in the eyes of the actors that I saw mixed with the haunting score and the compelling writing and character interaction. I thought it made it a very effective and very emotionally affecting horror film. It's available on HBO Max.
I'll be honest, I wasn't crazy about this movie. I think there's a lot of elements that I liked. I think all of the actors are good, and I think the atmosphere is good up to a certain point. But the movie starts to lose tension for me, and I have to admit the thing is there's not that much Native American horror out there based on Native Americans. It does bother me that I don't understand how in 2021 we're still doing this thing where we delve into Native American legends or legends from indigenous people or from other cultures and center it all around blonde white people. It's hard for me that that's still to believe that that's still going on to this day and age. It's an okay movie for me up to a certain point. It deals with a lot of different things like the destruction of rural communities. The opioid crisis is something that's trying to tackle child abuse and molestation, but it just seems to me that it kind of doesn't explore any of these themes to a satisfying end to me. It kind of like tosses them out with like these little revelations here and there, but it never fully it spends too much trying to delve into the meaning of a lot of it. And after a while, the dreary atmosphere started to become a put off, and I didn't care by the end of it. I liked the first 30 or 40 minutes of it, but it really, after a while, I just kind of lost my patience with this movie.
And I was completely engrossed from beginning to end. And I've seen a few tellings of the Wendigo story, and this is the best by far that I've seen. And I would like to see a Native American movie featuring the Wendigo too. But if you really think about it, how is that really going to get funding? Like when Blood Quantum came out a couple of years ago, it's a zombie movie with based on Native American folklore and everything. Nobody cared about it. So I think it's really hard to go to investors and say, oh, I want to do this story about the Wendigo. It's going to have all Native American cast, and investors be like, okay, how can we sell that?
That's true, but I doesn't mean I don't think we should try. And the fact is, where this is located, it's located very near a Native American reservation in terms of the locale of this. And I think that's what that bothers me a little bit more. It's like you couldn't go further, a little bit further. And then they have a Native American in this movie. They have one at the beginning just to lay out the legend when they're talking about it. And then the sheriff later on in the movie comes through and they're talking to him. And it's just it reminds me a little bit of what they call what they do for a lot of movies have dropped this, which is the magical Negro trope, where a black person comes in just to explain something very wise to you. They always have this like really smart wisdom and like insight into what's going on, but they're never important enough for the story. They're just there to kind of explain things, and they get shuffled off. I just feel like they could have found a way to incorporate a little bit more, especially since the locale is actually very close to a Native American reservation. And that's the reason the Wendigo is there, is because it's a Native American legend, and it comes from that community. It's definitely not a bad movie. There's a lot going on. I mean, I love Kerry Russell. I think she's a great actress. This is one of her best performances. If you haven't seen The American, she's fucking phenomenal, and I think she might have won an Emmy for that. I'm not really sure. Jesse Plemons is good. There's a lot of good stuff going in here that I respect. It's just too many things didn't go well for me in this one.
Yeah, for me, I was so wrapped up in the story of this teacher and her trying to help this little boy, and then the dynamic with her and her brother, where he kind of resents her for leaving, and stuff like that. So I was so wrapped up in that. I don't even think of the other things. You know what I mean? Like I can see that having a problem with the other things you had problem with, but for me, I was so wrapped up in the story, and then it was so well crafted. Nothing actually took me out of it.
It is a well directed movie. It is very well directed. But it's better directed than a lot of horror movies that come out. And I'll even say it's better directed than a lot of movies that made my list.
Yeah, but one thing I will agree on is the exposition from the Native American guy. Like he was just thrown in there for exposition, because they come and talk to him as if they know him already, as if we know him already.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And he explains what's going on very matter of factly. You know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of kind of unraveling what this thing actually is, he kind of comes in there and explains, here's exactly what it is.
That's funny, yeah. But
I really liked it though.
Yeah, I could definitely. It's one that I could definitely see what people appreciate about it. What people appreciated about it, though, it's definitely very well crafted, and I have to give the director credit. He really dedicates to the atmosphere that he sets up in this movie.
Yeah, for
So
sure. So what's your number 10?
my number 10 is a Chilean film in Spanish called The Last Matinee. I don't know if you got a chance to see this one.
Yes,
This
I saw
is
this one.
Yeah, this is, I would say it's a modernized giallo. Takes place in a movie theater on a stormy night in Montevideo. An engineering student named Anna takes over the duties of her father, a projectionist at a declining movie theater. And unbeknownst to her, the audience watching the film that she's running, the audience watching the film is being murdered by a crazed killer on the inside. This is one of those interesting ones because I have to get one criticism of this movie out of the way before I get to what I enjoyed about it. The main character was set up to be a lot more competent than she ends up being by the end of the movie, and she ended up getting on my nerves on several occasions, making very poor decisions. Granted, I understand she was under a lot of pressure, but she made very poor decisions. However, I loved all the other characters in this movie. I love the kids that get slaughtered. I love the little couple. I love the awkward. I like that little awkward couple with the guy who's like really struggling on his date.
Uh,
She throws every single hint at him, and it takes like she moves mountains for him to finally like make a move, and he doesn't even really make a move to finally get it. I thought that was funny. I thought that the kids were likable. I like the setup. This probably is my favorite gore of the year. I loved all of the kill scenes in this. I thought the skewering was great. The details, I thought it was beautifully filmed. It reminded me a lot of, I mean, it is a modern day giallo, and I kind of love that. If you've noticed that trend lately, giallos,
oh yeah.
like that thing that like had their big burst in the 70s. They kind of went away after that by the early 80s. I feel like American slasher films kind of replaced the Italian giallo movies, and we didn't really see much of them for years. And in the past, I'd say 6 or 7 years or so, we're seeing a lot of neo giallo films kind of like to take prominence in the horror genre, and it's a trend that I want to actually see more of because it's one of my became one of my favorite subgenres. I thought it was just exciting, it was entertaining, it was funny at times, it had me laughing, and I loved all of the gore scenes. I had a blast with this movie. I just wish the main character could have been a little bit better because I felt like she's likable at first. You're in there with her, and then she makes profoundly stupid decisions, and by the end of it, I was a little bit irritated by who she chose to save. And I
Yeah.
don't want to do the ending. I mean, it's a very giallo ending, though. I must say, I understand why they chose for her to save somebody else instead of the other person, because it kind of sets up that kind of the type of ending that you usually see in giallo movies. But overall, I had a blast with this movie. I think it's colorful, beautiful, well filmed, and I'm a good fan of good gory giallo kills, and I'm happy to see this trend resurrected.
And that movie is a great example of just how great of a movie of a horror year this was.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a wide variety of just ideas and stories and kills and atmosphere. And this is one that it could have easily made it into my honorable mentions, even into my top 10, but this is one that just got lost in this cluster of really solid movies I saw around the same time. So it could have easily made it into my honorable mentions. It just didn't.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, yeah, I don't like. I loved it and I thought it was great, but I don't know how everybody's gonna react to it. I feel like if you're not acclimated to this style of horror filmmaking, you're not gonna enjoy it. And I'm pretty sure for some people, it's probably just gonna be too cheeky for them. But I'm a big fan of these throwbacks of these exploitation and giallo movies. And in fact, 3 of the movies in my top 10 list are heavily influenced by giallo films.
Yeah, more Giallo throwbacks. I'm loving them.
So that was my number 10, The Last Matinee. Yeah, please go check it out. Directed by Maximilian Contenti. Really good Argentinian horror film. And I got to say, almost about half of my list is also made up of foreign horror films this year.
Oh, my there's a lot of foreign on mine too.
Yeah, great. Like, and what I like about it is I've noticed is just it's not just American horror films that are thriving. I feel like like with the Queen of Black Magic, which I mentioned earlier, which I'm actually shocked didn't make my top 10 because it was so visceral and vicious and mean and enthralling. But like you see more Indonesian horror films, you see a little bit more Spanish horror films. We're starting to see more South Korean horror films.
Yes.
It seems to be like a wave across the world that horror isn't just thriving in the US. I think it's thriving worldwide.
Yeah, and I can't believe I'm just now discovering Indonesian horror in the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen like four or five really good Indonesian horrors in a row. And then I watched Queen of Black Magic this year. And then I found out afterwards it's a remake of another classic Indonesian horror film. I didn't even know there were classic Indonesian horror films.
That's what I said. I was like, there's classic Indonesian horror films? Shit, I must have been missing out.
I know. So we got some more horror films to dive into if they got that many good ones. So that brings me to number 9 on my list. This one is Psycho Goreman. We got to see this one at Beyond Fest, which is awesome.
I like this one a lot.
This was written and directed by Steven Kostanski, who did The Void, and he's currently doing episodes of the Days of the Dead series. I haven't seen that one yet. The stands out in this are Nita Josie Hanna as Mimi. She's a mean little cuss of a girl. Owen Meyer as her brother Luke. Matthew Ninebert as Psycho Goreman himself. And then Stephen Vlahos as the voice of Psycho Goreman. It is hilarious. The entire movie is hilarious from beginning to end. It's a splatter film with tons of gore, but a youthful energy as if Trauma did a Power Rangers movie. Nita Josie Hanna is both magnetic and repellent as Mimi, which makes her even funnier than Psycho Goreman. And I just thought it was a wholly original vision that keeps you smiling and wincing through the whole damn thing.
Oh yeah, I like this one a lot. I remember we got to go see this at the Fantastic Fest. I actually had to struggle this one because we saw this in 2020. It's not a 2020 movie, but we got to see it in 2020. It's a 2021 horror movie.
Yeah.
I deliberately left it off the list last year just because I wanted it to count towards this year because I was pretty sure it was going to make it. But this is among a small handful that landed just outside my honorable mentions. But this is a really fun one. It's definitely one of the most fun horror movies of the year. It has spirit. It's spunky. The little girl is hilarious. She reminds me of your daughter, Michael. The snappy and everything. Psycho Goreman himself is funny when he starts repeating like the hunky boys thing. Oh, that's hilarious. That's classic. I dug this. I've noticed that in the horror groups, if you pay attention, this is one of those few horror films that seems to be universally liked. I haven't seen that much negative about it. I've seen a couple of people complaining about not liking the little girl here and there, but overall I'm pretty surprised. It seems to be unanimously embraced by the horror community.
And as goofy as it was at times, I thought it would get a lot of hate, but no, people are loving this thing.
No, people, it shows you, people want to have fun. At the end of the day, we all want to have fun. And I think horror, the great thing about the genre is I love the style of the genre and the trappings. I don't necessarily love horror because it scares me per se, though I love horror movies that scare me. It's not a necessity for the genre. I just love the trappings of it, that you could put horror, you put comedy in it, you could put all these kinds of different modes of storytelling and plug it into the horror genre. And that's one of the things that I loved about it. So I really dug this movie too.
And one thing that describes perfectly why I like this movie so much is when the little girl is praying, and then in the middle of praying, she comes to the realization that she's not supposed to be doing these wrong things because she's not supposed to because it goes against God, and she gets pissed at God.
Yeah.
I don't care, God. I'll do what I want.
Yeah. My number 9 is a much different film, and I don't think it's that widely seen, but from what I've seen, it's divisive. And if people don't like this movie, I don't blame them because this is definitely not going to be for everybody, but it's specifically for my taste. It's the movie The Feast. It's a Welsh horror film. I don't know if you got a chance to see this one. It's about a wealthy family hosting a sumptuous dinner only for a mysterious young server to chillingly unravel their lives with terrifying consequences that they could never see coming. This is a very slow burn horror movie. So if slow burns are not your thing, you're really not going to like this movie because it takes a long time to marinate. So either this will bore the shit out of you, or if you're like me, you're going to find it ominous and unsettling in every frame. Another reason why I'm pretty sure this is divisive, none of the characters are very likable at all. These are all very ugly, despicable people, and none of them are particularly fun to spend time with. But I like the way that they're portrayed, and I like the way that they're filmed. I like that the way that the cinematography uses a lot of its wide landscapes, and it's very symmetrical shots that can convey the sense of emotional isolation and the distance that the family feels from each other. Very tense movie. I think the cinematography tips you off right from the start about the main character, Caddy, and her dubious behavior and her dubious motives and her nature. I'm thinking of that one shot that creeped me out. And this is one of the things that I liked about this movie. It creeped me out even though I couldn't explain what was creepy about it. There's one scene where she has glasses set up on a table and she's just perched on, and she's like doing these weird things where she's making noises with the glasses that just creep me out. It just lets you, kind of tips you off that something's very, very off from this girl. It's a movie that had me alert. I love where it ends up. I love the folk horror. That's another trend I'm noticing in horror. More folk horror seems to be becoming a bigger thing, and it's also a big part of my list as well. The folk horror elements on this really work for me. I think it has a theme of eco-terrorism, and there is a little bit of a message in this movie. However, a lot of the political horror that's come out lately, this one is a political horror movie that never feels political. It never feels like they're trying to shove a message down your throat. I feel like the message is very, very, very secondary to the ominous nature and the weird compositions and the uncomfortable atmosphere that's going on. And it just so happens to be about terrible wealthy people who take advantage of the land and who don't give a shit about what they destroy or the history they destroy or anything that they do. Really creepy film, really unsettling film, very artful, beautiful, slow, tense. Again, your mileage may vary. I guarantee you half the audience is going to hate it. And even if you like the elevated horror style, I don't think it guarantees that you're going to like this movie. But I dug this one a lot. Directed by Lee Haven Jones. It's a Welsh film. Nice to another foreign horror film on my list, a Welsh movie. Reminds me a little bit of something like The Killing of the Sacred Deer, but with a little bit more macabre by the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like that one too. It's got a really good atmosphere, really original, and it's really kind of engrossing through the whole thing. But it's another one of those that got lost in a cluster of just really strong movies, especially strong foreign horror.
Can't
a
you
lot
see
of it this year.
why I would give people warnings? Like, I could definitely see this like really pissing a lot of horror fans off. I know that not everybody's gonna dig this movie the way that I do.
Yeah, and there was a few movies like that this year too that
Mm-hmm.
I loved them, but I could see how they could rub some people the wrong way. Just some of them are just too different, so different.
Yeah. So that was my number 9.
All right, it brings us to my number 8. This one we already covered on the podcast, but I'll mention it briefly here. It's Blood Red Sky. It's a German vampire film, written and directed by Peter Thorwarth, and he wrote the story with Stefan Holtz.
Mm-hmm.
It stars Perry Baumeister as Nadja, the vampire mom, Carl Anton Koch as Elias, another great performance by a little kid, Alexander Scheer as 8-Ball, a great villain, Case Seti as Fedrid, the savior, Dominic Purcell as the terrorist, the white guy terrorist from Prison Break. He's Heatwave on DC movies. And it's about a woman with vampirism and her son board a transatlantic flight to New York on her way to be cured, as she is forced into action when a band of ruthless terrorists hijack the plane. I love the different languages spoken in it. It's a mixture of German, English, and Arabic. And the acting is so good, you almost know what everyone's saying without even looking at the subtitles. It oozes quality right from the opening scene, where you're dropped in the middle of a story as the plane lands, and then you go back to see what happened to lead up to that. endears you to the characters, and it advances the story without spoon feeding it to you. There's a huge climax on the plane, and then another climax after we pick up from the first scene where we left when the plane lands. So it's thrills on top of thrills on top of thrills. It's an intelligent and intense plane hijacking film even without the vampires. And surprisingly, the vampires add not just action and horror, they add depth, drama, suspense, and tension to the story instead of just vampires being thrown into action thrillers. So I thought it was pitch perfect action suspense thriller that could have been just a great action film even without the vampires. But like I said, the vampires bring a whole lot to it, not just the horror.
It's like a horror film that's in the vein of something like From Dusk Till Dawn. It's very visceral. It's very exciting. It never lets up. This is like one of those films where it's like, I would say it's the inversion of something of a horror movie like Feast, where I could see this movie having wide appeal and appealing to a lot of people because it doesn't really waste any time with its setup. And once it gets going, it never lets up with its tension. And I'd say even as it goes along, each climax becomes a little bit more intense or more, the stakes get higher as it goes along. So it's a really exciting, thrilling horror action movie.
And it's almost too exciting and suspenseful. It never lets up. Like any good script has some lulls so you can kind of think about what's going on. This one doesn't. It's just pow, pow, just pounding you in the head through the whole damn thing.
You can think about what's going on when the movie's over.
Exactly.
But yeah,
so that's my number 8 German horror.
It's a good one too. My number 8, another foreign horror film, the third foreign horror film on my list is Titane, the French film from Julia Docker. Now I know I'm probably saying her name wrong. She directed Raw, which was one of the best horror films of the year that it came out. This is a big step up. I wouldn't say it's better than Raw. It's different. But I mean, a big step. I think that they're roughly about as good as each other. I don't want to say that Titane, but when I say a step up, I mean a step up in terms of boldness, of audacity, of vision, of really trying to go for it. Because Raw was a really exciting, very subtle but disturbing take on cannibalism. There is nothing remotely subtle about this movie at all. Following a series of unexplained crimes, a former firefighter is reunited with his son who has been missing for 10 years. That doesn't even begin to explain the synopsis that they give to me what the hell this movie is about. It follows a young woman who got in a car accident when she was young and started fetishizing cars as she got older. She makes love to a vehicle in this movie, gets impregnated with the car, and goes on a little killing spree. And what really got me about this movie is that any movie like this could just get by off on its premise alone. A woman getting impregnated by a car and having all kinds of vicious kills and a killing spree. And that would have been a satisfying horror movie right there. But this does so much more with that. I think there's a lot of the interesting themes of family. And it's about people who are empty, who are trying to kind of like fill a void in their lives, where the main character, she has a father, but they don't really have very much of a relationship. So when she starts posing as the firefighter's son, after a while, it goes from an act that she's putting on to get the feeling that she actually cares for him. And when the firefighter realizes it's not actually his son, he doesn't really care because his son went missing years ago and he's been kind of living a sad life, kind of holding out hope for his son to return. And they get locked in this very sick relationship that's very strange. And it's wrong. It's wrong, and it shouldn't be happening. But there's something vaguely touching amidst all of that weird shit that's going on. You get a sense that they really care for each other. And the last moment of birth, where she finally gives birth to the titanium baby, the guy basically promises the firefighter that he's going to take care of it. So there's a vein of sweetness in this movie for all the bizarre, weird shit going on, and for all the car fucking and the brutal kills and the wild shit going on. It is ultimately a sad film about people searching for family and finding it in the weirdest and most unlikely places. Another shocking thing, this movie won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which I could never have thought years ago. A body horror movie this wild winning the top forget the Oscars. That's the fucking best award to win, is the Palme d'Or. To get such a prestigious prize to the biggest film festival in the world, to a body horror film, I think is awesome. I really dug it. I loved it. It was definitely one of my favorite horror movies of the year.
Well, this thing was just batshit insane.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it constantly throwing shit at you, and there's so many elements at play all at the same time: the body horror, the drama, the action, the strangeness, and everything is perfectly balanced. There's not one element that dominates all the others.
Mm-hmm.
It's all perfectly balanced through the whole thing, where certain points in the movie you feel like you're watching a different movie, but then it kind of weaves back into the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go ahead and say this is my number 7.
Okay, well, that goes perfect. You're going to go into number 7 anyway.
Yeah, so this is my number 7, and it just bombards the senses from beginning to end, and it's a sometimes almost confusing way. It's strange and fetishistic at times with these moments of drama and surrealism, and I'm actually going to probably have to go watch this multiple times to get the full scope and impact of the film. But just what I got from it from watching it once was enough to put it at my number 7, because it's as if Raw was injected with David Lynch and David Cronenberg style, and it turned into something far removed from all of them.
Yeah, that's a good way. You could definitely see a Lynchian and a Cronenberg influence, but it doesn't feel like a film that either of those men would have directed.
No, and to see this director go from something so stripped down and raw to to something so polished but still so insane. It's just I love when directors do this. It was a really a big surprise from this director, because I was expecting something on a smaller scale, more like Raw, but damn.
I would recommend the second viewing, because the second viewing is what crystallized some of the more sad themes of the movie. Because the first time I saw it, when we watched it together, I was just so bombarded by the
Yeah, you just constantly
what the hell, that I didn't really take in how touching some of it was until I watched it a second time, with regards to relationship between the firefighter and the main character and the places that it goes. So I think a second viewing will outline, once you've gotten past all the crazy shit that kind of blows your mind, I think the second viewing will outline the more nuanced emotional parts of the storytelling.
Yeah, and I have to mention the performance of Vincent Linden as Vincent, Agatha Rossell as Alexia/Adrian,
Mm-hmm.
and then Garance Marillier from Raw as Justine.
Cool. So that's your number 8 and my number 8 and your number 7. So,
yeah, So what's your number 7?
My number 7 is actually another film from a female horror director. It's Neil DaCosta's take on Candyman 2021. I actually rewatched this last night before when I was kind of finalizing my list. This is the one movie that was bothering me, where I needed to see it one more time for it to crystallize where this belongs on my list. So it took a while for me to figure it out, and definitely belongs in the top 10. And it's a movie that could shoot up if I see it more. What I found interesting about this is that as far as like what after Scream 5, we're going to call them all requels. The requels, the legacy sequel, whatever you want to call it, they all tend to fall into these very specific tropes, and they're tropes that are you could see them in something like Halloween 2018, and even the latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre really falls into that. Scream kind of sent it up recently, but I think out of all of the legacy requels, this is the one that most carves out its own path and feels like it's doing its own thing. It definitely it relies so much on the original Candyman film and your knowledge of it and your understanding of the story. But at the same time, it separates it where it doesn't feel like this is a retread of the original Candyman in any way. I think it's beautifully shot. It's scary, it's elegant, and it's thoughtful. I think the compositions are Kubrickian, and I think that's a term that's really overused. I feel like anytime anything is slow and artsy, people want to say it's Kubrickian, but it's actually really not most of the time. This, I actually think, is Kubrickian in terms of the symmetry of the shots and the lighting style and the atmosphere that Nia DaCosta is trying to evoke. It reminds me a little bit of The Shining. Some of the camera work is jaw-dropping. I'm thinking of that one scene where the lady gets killed in her apartment, and it starts off in a close-up, and it just
Yes.
backs out so you see the whole apartment. And normally in a movie like that, you could feel cheated by that kind of death scene because it takes place so far away, but it's surrounded by such, I don't know, opulent beauty that you don't really give a shit. It's just so effective. It also has some of the most bizarre kill scenes because you don't see the character unless you glimpse them in the mirror. So what you have is an invisible force attacking people, except when they look in the mirror. And I think that gives really off-kilter kills. I love all the reflection shots. The utilization of reflections in the kill scenes really makes the suspense very unique and off-kilter. The puppet sequences help to give this movie a very unique flavor. It sets it apart from the original Candyman and from most horror in general. And it also helps the film to adopt elements from the original story, while making it easier to tell some of the more sensitive stories of Black generational pain and trauma, especially when they start illustrating the history. It's better to see it in puppetry because we don't need to really be wallowing in people's pain that way. Um, it's pays satisfying homage to the original, and I love. And this is why this movie is divisive. It completely changes details of the Candyman legend. I want to be clear. I don't think this contradicts anything about the original Candyman movie or the myth or the legend at all. There's nothing that contradicts it. It just expands it. And the way that this movie changes details from the original and gives us several different versions of Candyman is fitting for the idea of myths and urban legends. One of the central cores of myths is that they adopt and change over time. They adapt to suit the times and they adapt to suit the storyteller. But the core of the myth remains intact. They even tackle it at the end, where the crazy guy from the laundromat even says when he's trying to create his own legend, you could create, make the story your own, but certain things have to be the same. It has to be the hook for a hand. It has to have kind of a tragic element for it to work. And I thought it was a very good choice for taking ownership for a movie that's about taking ownership of the stories that we tell. I think it's creepy. It's suspenseful. I loved all of the kill scenes in this one. I thought they were some of the most original kill scenes, like I said earlier, because of the way that they're shot. I love the color schemes, the setup, the performances, the themes. My only complaint, and this complaint remains true on both viewings, is that I wish it were like 15 or 20 minutes longer. I actually think that this could have served to be 15 or 20 minutes longer. And I really appreciate the update of the Candyman legend. And it prevents turning Tony Todd's Candyman into a cliche killer. And this is not to down. I love Freddy and I love Jason, but it stops him from becoming that type of cliche of, oh, the horror movie monster is back, and makes the myth something much more unique and interesting in my view. And it's the most original of the legacy sequels. It's the one that most feels like they came up with a completely original story. All these legacy sequels tell their own story, but in a way they kind of read like soft reboots. They're new stories, but they're sort of telling the same story we got the first way around in a modern setting. This is one of the few that actually tells a whole new story.
Yeah, I think it's the best out of all these new legacy sequels.
Yeah.
It does what they're supposed to do. It, like you said, it takes the legend and changes it in a way to make it original and unique to this film.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard Tony Todd himself discuss it when I went to Texas Frightmare, and he is extremely proud of it. He wasn't just saying that just because he's a part of it. He's extremely proud of what they did with it. He's extremely proud of what they did to expand the folklore. And he even went so far as, because when I went to Texas Frightmare, it had already been out for a couple months. And he was telling people, have you seen the new Candyman? They started asking him a question. They said, no, well, you can't ask me a question. What are you doing at the Candyman panel if you haven't seen the new one?
I feel like a lot of people were hating on this movie and hating on the fact that Tony Todd is not the Candyman in the traditional way in this movie. But I love that Tony Todd is repping it that way and is encouraging people to see it. because I think people are missing the point of myths and urban legends and the way that they adapt and change over time. It only makes sense that if the myth were to survive, if the legend were to have its power retained, in order for legends to retain their power, they have to kind of adapt to whatever time they're in and to whoever's telling the story. So legends and myths are eternal, but their details are constantly changing. They're constantly shifting. And even though this is getting very far away from the original Clive Barker story of the Forbidden, because it completely carves its own path. It's very Barkerian in that sense, where a big theme of a lot of Clive Barker's work is that stories that exist didn't really start anywhere, that they've always been around, and that they adapt over times, and that the person telling it will change the details to suit them as long as the core remains the same. So it's very actually true to the original Clive Barker mythology, even though this is starting to get far away from the original Forbidden story. Really fantastic movie. Loved it.
And literally nothing shoehorned in there like you get with a lot of legacy sequels. As you know, I like the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but come on, Sally Hardesty was just shoehorned in there, just shoved in there. Get in there.
We'll talk about that next week. I have a lot to say. Yeah, we'll talk about that next week for sure.
All right, so another spoiler alert, Candyman will be coming up later on in my list. But for now, we'll do my number 6. This is another foreign horror film from Thailand/South Korea. It's The Medium. Loved this movie. It's directed and co-written by Benjong Pisanthankan. I hope I got that right. Benjong Pisanthankan. He did the movie Shudder, the original Shudder. And on ABCs of Death, he did End for Nuptials, which is a good little short. It's written by Shantavit Dahanasevi, Dahongjin, and Siwawut Siwatanen. Yeah, I'm probably butchering those names. That's the thing with all the foreign horror, we end up butchering the names.
Sorry, our ignorant American asses are not getting it right. We apologize to the audience, but we support you.
And I'm going to try to say these 3 actresses because they really carry this movie well. And the women in this movie are awesome. The guys are kind of an afterthought. I always love seeing strong girl power in a movie. Anyway, it's Narilia Gulmangol Pech as Mink, Sawani Utuma as Nim, and Sarani Yankitikin as Noi. All great performances, awesome film. It's about a broken family in a small Thai village thinks that a young woman is behaving strangely because she has been chosen to be the town shaman. But the cause of her behavior is actually an evil force that threatens to consume the whole village. This one is a found footage documentary style film, and the story unfolds as the doc is being filmed. This reminded me a lot of Noroi the Curse, which I loved. It's one of the best found footage films I ever seen, and this one might be even more engrossing. The family drama between the sisters feels real, and so does the evil. The evil feels just as real as the drama. It's subtle when it needs to be. It's in your face when it needs to be. It's deeply affecting and ends up creeping you out and leaving you a little depressed at the end, just because of the way you feel for this innocent family that is consumed by this evil. So just effective from beginning to end. It's available on Shudder. Another great example of how well Shudder curates their content, because you can't see this anywhere else but Shudder, and run to see this movie because it's an excellent movie, one of the best found footage movies I've ever seen. And I didn't think it was good. I seen the similarities to Noroi the Curse right away, and I didn't expect to like it more than Noroi the Curse, but I actually did by the end. So The Medium is an awesome movie from Thailand and South Korea.
I fucking loved The Medium. This is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's scary. It is so damn good. But I'm gonna save what I have to say for it a little later. Spoiler alert, it's a little hot. It's up on my list a little more. But yeah, this is fantastic. And as far as the found footage aspect goes, I didn't realize this was a found footage movie until like last night when I was like mulling over this list. that it hit me that it was a found footage movie, because it actually makes you forget that that's what it is for a
It really does. It
period of
does.
time, that it doesn't even feel like it. And kudos for them to do that, to kind of delve into that genre and to completely sidestep almost everything that defines what found footage is.
Yeah, and then when the cameramen start freaking out, I was almost surprised. I said, "Oh yeah, there's cameramen," and we know about them. They're not just the DPs.
Yep. Got excellent movie. We'll talk a little more about it later. My number 6 is Saint Maud, the A24 horror film. This is the third movie in a row on my list of a female director, Rose Glass. Um, I really dug this movie a lot. It reminds me a lot, obviously, of A24 horror pictures like Hereditary and The Witch, that it kind of feels like for a while that it's kind of going to be in like the same vein as that. And then by the end of the movie, I would say it becomes like an anti-Hereditary or an anti-The Witch by the end of it, and it completely pulls the rug out from underneath it and really just punches you in the gut with that ending. Love that ending. This has been a great year for horror movie endings too, by the way, for movies that really sell themselves by the time it's over. It's about a young girl having recently found God. A self-effacing young nurse, Maud, arrives at a plush home to take care for Amanda, a hedonistic dancer left frail from chronic illness. When a chance encounter with a former colleague throws up hints of a dark past, it becomes clear that there's more to Sweet Maud than meets the eye. And this is a horror movie that tackles the hypocrisy of religious zealots and the way that they try to force their morals on other people, the judgmental ways in which they operate in the world, that don't really speak to the best things about religion, which are the aspiring to being a better person, the aspiring to pleasing like a higher power. This is just a religious zealot going full throttle, and for a while you think that she might be right, and by the end of the movie kind of slaps the viewer in the face and kind of slaps the character in her face. It says, no, this behavior is shitty and unacceptable, and this woman was fucking delusional and crazy the entire time. And that's all I'm going to say. The ending packs a punch, and it does the opposite of what most of these elevated horror films, these supernatural elevated horror films, do by the end. It goes in the completely opposite direction. The ending kind of had me giggling in a certain way. I think if you have a very cynical sense of humor, you'll find it funny like I did. But that doesn't take away from how disturbing it is and the strange delusion going on. I had a lot of fun with Saint Maud. I think it's one of the funner, easier to watch of the elevated horror flicks, as they like to call them these days. Very entertaining. And I don't even think it feels like typical elevated horror. I think it's pretty fast paced, and I think it all unfurls at a very steady clip. I don't really feel that there's ever any like really slow build up. There's definitely a lot of atmosphere, but I don't feel that this movie has a slow build up at all.
Yes, some people, even people that like it, are calling it a slow burn. I didn't find it slow at all. I found it very fast paced, and it kind of gets to the story beats pretty fast.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
then that ending is probably one of the best of the year.
Oh, yeah.
It leaves you reeling.
Oh, it had me laughing. I gotta be honest, I already liked the movie a lot, but the ending put it up a little bit higher, because just the way that it all comes together at the end, I was like, aha, that's clever. That's funny. It's also disturbing and scary and wrong. Loved it. Great ending.
And for that director to poke you and tease you through the whole damn thing, it might be real. It might be real.
Damn. Great. Good stuff. Loved it.
That was the first horror movie I seen of the year. I remember that.
Mm-hmm. So that
Really
was
cool.
my number 6.
So now we get to my top 5. You already discussed this one, but I'll discuss it again briefly. Candyman. This was my number 5, co-written and directed by Nia DaCosta. Did an excellent job here. She's the first Black female filmmaker to have a film open at number 1. It's written by Jordan Peele and Wynn Rosenfeld. Synopsis: in present day, a decade after the last of the Cabrini Green towers were torn down, Anthony and his partner move into a loft in the now gentrified Cabrini. A chance encounter with an old-timer exposes Anthony to the true story behind Candyman. Anxious to use these macabre details in his studio as fresh grist for paintings, He unknowingly opens a door to a complex past that unravels his own sanity and unleashes a terrifying wave of violence.
Oh,
All great performances across the board. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Anthony, uh, Tiona Paris from Dear White People, Mad Men, Chirac, and Point Blank. She plays Brianna. She's awesome, especially in some of the.
yeah. Go
Huh?
on. She's awesome in what?
Oh, she's awesome as in this as the voice of reason, and she kind of. I like a lot of her dialogue, basically, and you really get to know who she is, and you get to know who the main character is through their dialogue.
You know, I didn't find out until last night that she was actually Dawn from Mad Men. Dawn is Dawn's secretary, Dawn.
Oh yeah,
Dawn, but I completely forgot she was in Mad Men until I was researching this movie last night. Oh yeah, great cast too. I forgot to even mention that when I talked to Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Tiona Paris. Really good leads, very likable people too.
definitely. And Nathan Stewart Jarrett as Troy, Brianna's brother. Coleman Domingo is William Burke, the resident. And Vanessa Williams, of course, returns as Anna Marie from the original. And, of course, the great Tony Todd. I love the puppetry animation sequences you talked about. They were done by Manual Cinema in Chicago. And DaCosta said that she and Jordan Peele chose the shadow puppets in favor of traditional flashback scenes or clips from the first film, which was an excellent, excellent idea. It didn't feel like a big bloated, big budget studio production, but it had that polish. And it didn't feel like a low budget indie feature, but it felt very personal and made with passion like an indie feature.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that dynamic about it. Like you said, it dismantles the mythos of the original while also building on it. That's impressive in itself.
It dismantles it without contradicting it either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it expands on it in a very satisfying way. Especially, it starts expanding on it, expands more, and then Tony Todd's voice comes in. It's just sweet.
Mm-hmm.
The kills, awesome. Cleverly shot. The high-rise window kill, awesome. Begins with an excellent invisible throat slit. The couple having sex in the gallery kill, that was awesome. The brutal kill of the human villain. And then that bathroom kill with the shots in the compact mirror. And then all the final ending kills. Everything was great about this. I loved it from beginning to end. Just what a legacy sequel should be.
And isn't it crazy how the reflections and everything, and like I'm thinking specifically of that bathroom scene of like looking under the stall and the reflections in the compact mirror. It's one of the goriest sections of a movie that almost features no gore at the same time, but it's still gory, but not really. I don't know how to put it, but it's like it's gory, but it's not. Like I did like really clever the way that they did that.
Yeah, and if you get a chance, check out Behind the Monsters. It's a little docu-series on Shudder. The Candyman episode features a lot of Nia DaCosta talking about the Candyman mythos and what she did with the remake. And you really, I mean, not remake, the legacy sequel. And you really see why it's so good because she really had a good grasp, and she's really passionate about the story. And she has this way about her. I can see why she was like why Jordan Peele was so impressed with her. She's very articulate in the way she explains her vision, and there's a certain confidence about the way she speaks that she's going to be a really really good filmmaker and a force to deal with in the horror genre. I have a feeling from now on.
Oh yeah, I mean her next movie is a Marvel movie. Whenever she's done with that, I want to see her return to horror because she has like a real gift for gloomy atmosphere and tension. And what's interesting is the original Candyman has a very gloomy, very intoxicating atmosphere. This one does too, but it feels completely dissimilar. It's a style that's not at all like the original Candy. It still feels true to the world, but she definitely has her own very specific vision and style, and her gloomy atmosphere and the sense of foreboding is vastly different from what they did in 1992. Another thing that I loved about it, these are how requels should be. They need to carve out their own paths in order for them to work. And I think this one is the one that most carve of all the requels. It's the one that is the most original and carves its own path, I think.
Yeah, and do more than just remind people of the original. Do more with
Tell
it.
a new story.
Yeah, weave it into the narrative more, and become and come up with a new narrative.
Excellent movie. Now we're on my top five. This is the fourth film on here in a row. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the fourth film on the row. This is a female director made this one. It is the Slumber Party Massacre reboot from the Sci-Fi Channel, directed by Danishka Esterhazy. Dana, daughter of the only survivor of a massacre in 1993, is going on a weekend trip with her friends. After their car breaks down in the very same town where her mother once fought the driller killer, Dana and her friends must come face to face with the man who haunted her mother's life for the past 30 years. Oh man, I don't know why this movie resonated so much with me or why I had such a time, because there's movies on the lower on this list that are arguably like better films, you want to say. But if we're talking just strictly about personal preference and how movies hit me, I had such a blast with this movie. I had so much fun with the Slumber Party Massacre. I'm a big fan of the original, and I did it twice. I've seen it twice. When I watched this, I watched the original Slumber Party Massacre back to back with the remake of the Slumber Party Massacre, and I think it's a fucking great double feature. These movies are kind of in conversations with each other because the original 1980 Slumber Party Massacre was a horror movie that was meant to be a satire of slasher films and the misogyny of slasher films. So there's a lot of commentary put in there, but the way that they do it in the original Slumber Party Massacre is to exaggerate it. So in slasher movies, you're used to seeing female bodies being leered at inappropriately by the camera. Slumber Party Massacre, the original, way overdoes it, thus calling attention to how ridiculous some of it actually is. This one does it in the opposite direction by focusing it on the guys, because there's another slumber party going on across the lake. This time it's a bunch of guys, and all of those shots of them being fetishized with their bodies and the showers and everything is flipped all to males. And it kind of outlines how ridiculous it was in the first place, because it's hilarious. All these fucking buff dudes having these pillow fights together, and then those weird shots of them all in the shower was absolutely hilarious. It has a fun spirit. It has a fun energy. It's just so energetic. I think the cast of girls are really, really likable. I think their dialogue is funny, but I don't think that it sacrifices the seriousness of the slasher elements or the gore or the violence or anything like that. They really go full throttle with that and commit to it and never let the comedy undercut it. It's just it's a movie that, like I said, it feels like it's having a conversation with the original. So it's a more modern idea. It's a more modern take on how to do, I guess, a feminist slasher, or a slasher movie that kind of satirizes a lot of tropes of the slasher genre. Really good stuff. I just had a blast with it. It's one of those movies that kept a smile on my face. Now, some of the dialogue here and there is a little bit on the nose occasionally, as is the case with a lot of movies now. So there's a couple of eye roll moments and goes like, ugh. I shrugged at some of it, especially that line where he's like, I would stay here, but my toxic masculinity is forcing me to go out and do something stupid. So all the nose is so dumb. But I could forgive so much of that when it has such a goofy, infectious spirit. I dug this movie. I mean, I love what the Sci-Fi Channel did, because between this and the Child's Play series, I'm shocked at how much I've really enjoyed sci-fi horror this year. Love the Slumber Party Massacre remake. I actually just brought the Blu-ray from Scream Factory recently. Total blast. Fun movie.
I really liked it. I thought it was very entertaining and hilarious just on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But the only reason it didn't make my list is just that it needs the original to have the full impact of it.
I could see that, definitely.
But other than that, it definitely would have made my list, because it's a lot of fun. I love movies that don't take itself too seriously,
Mm-hmm.
and I love when a mirror is held up to these borderline misogynistic slasher films, even though it was done by a feminist.
Yeah, the original was actually written by a feminist icon and directed by a female director. But it's kind of funny how it's satirizing it but wallowing it on the same time. This is satirizing it without wallowing in it at the same
Yeah,
time. It's kind of flipping it and putting it in a different direction.
exactly.
I watched it twice, and there are not many films that came out in 2021 that had me smiling as much as this movie did.
So that brings us to my number 4. You already discussed this, so I'll go over it quickly. It's The Empty Man. Is number 4 for me. Written and directed by David Pryor, who was before this, he was mostly a behind-the-scenes filmmaker. And man, can you tell this guy learned a lot in his behind-the-scenes filmmaking? Because damn, is this movie made well. It's based on the Boom Studios graphic novel by Cullen Bunn. It stars James Badge Dale as James. You might have seen him in Hold the Dark, Standoff at Sparrow Creek, or The Departed. Marin Ireland is Nora. She's the actress from Dark and the Wicked. Sasha Frolova as Amanda. Samantha Logan as Devara. And the great Stephen Root as Arthur. He's the guy from Office Space, King of the Hill, and he was recently in Mr. Robot. So it's about a former cop is on the trail of a missing girl when he discovers a secretive group that are attempting to summon a terrifying supernatural entity. Now, this one right here, it jumps right into the action, right into the mystery. It starts building on the mystery right away. And then the things, you have to pay attention from the first scene because things you see at the beginning permeate throughout the entire story. And then we meet the protagonist, James, and the movie grounds itself immediately. He feels real. The people in the town feel real. The town itself feels real. It's got that Chopin type of piano score that really pulls you in, and it sets like a somber mood. Really good natural dialogue that brings up, it's hard to naturally bring up things like existential topics. Like they talk about how we manifest both good and evil, good and bad in our lives. So it brings up stuff like that very naturally because the characters are discussing it. Strategic, extreme close-up shots. I always love these because it always pulls you into that world and it won't let you out. Just when you start backing up away from it, it pulls you right back in and makes you feel what the characters are feeling. And then it's got that countdown aspect to it where it's day 1, you think about him. Day 2, you see him. Day 3, he comes after you. So it's that ratcheting up the tension with each day that goes by. I love that about it. The cult aspect, how they were woven into the story pretty effortlessly and become part of the mystery. I love that steam room scene. Excellent kill with great effects and camera work. I love how throughout the whole movie, it's so well crafted that every time a plot point is revealed and you think you know what's going on, then it goes even deeper than you thought it was going to go. And then that brings me to the first thing that solidified this to me that it was going to be an instant classic. When Arthur, played by Stephen Root, he finishes his sermon and talks to James about the empty man, and then the story opens further there, and he brings up this really interesting topic where he says, if you say your name enough times, it becomes gibberish. So which is more real, your name or the gibberish? So it brings up a lot of compelling ideas like that. It's got a thick tension. Amazing set design throughout. I love the way everything is designed on it. The best scene for me, and another thing that makes it an instant classic, is the people dancing around the bonfire. It's so strange and scary and ominous. The way they I couldn't even tell if that was practical or CG. The way they were kind of floating around the hillside and it got more and more menacing as the scene progressed. But most films you see, they're either heavy on story, heavy on horror, or heavy on the atmosphere. And this is all three, and a perfect balance of all of them. I loved all the music. The music was by Christopher Young, who did the music for the score for Sinister, Drag Me to Hell, The Grudge, Tales from the Hood, Hellraiser 1 and 2, and Trick or Treat. And then also music from Lustmord. I love Lustmord. He did music for The Void, Vacancy, Idle Hands, Bride of Chucky, From Dusk Till Dawn, and The Crow. All these elements mixed together just makes this one of the best horror films I've seen in a while. It was one of the last films made by Fox before being bought by Disney. So it was kind of dumped without any proper marketing or anything. And it wasn't even a profitable DVD release. So we really need to watch this movie, horror fans, and give it the recognition it deserves.
Oh yeah, I love this one. This was actually when we discussed in my honorable mentions, it's actually my number 11th slot, so it barely slid out of my top 10. But yeah, I feel like it's already quick becoming a pretty big cult hit, and I'm not surprised after bombing at the box office. It's one of those movies that was able to find its audience immediately after. So I'm pretty sure we're going to hear more about The Empty Man in the years to come. And so people are clear. It's not like it's not the Slender Man. I think people associate with that and get turned off by it. That's not what
It's not.
movie is.
It's not the Bye Bye Man either. Don't get it
No.
confused.
Bye-Bye
It's
Man.
way better than those.
Yeah, really good movie. So my number 4 pick is actually Censor. It's a film from the UK. After viewing a strangely familiar video nasty, Enid, a film censor, sets out to solve the past mystery of her sister's disappearance, embarking on a quest that dissolves the line between fiction and reality. For me, this is probably one of the most original and thought-provoking horror movies I've seen in years. I don't think I've ever seen a film that's normally about film censors, so I found that to be a really interesting window into the story, as well as it taking place at the height of like Thatcherism, which is the UK's complement to what Reaganism was over here. And I found Enid to be a very interesting character in the things that this movie says about censorship. One of the easiest things it would have been to do, and I think a lot of us would have done if we were writing a film like this, is to make the film censor, somebody who's trying to censor films, extremely deeply unsympathetic and kind of not handling it. And I think that would have been an easy choice. They give her a little bit more complexity. Enid, despite being a film censor, is not a bad person, but she is highly disturbed. And as the film goes on, it becomes very clear that she's projecting her own psychosis and her own mental hangups onto censorship. She believes because the movie goes on, while she's reviewing a film to censor, it starts to remind her of an incident from her youth when her sister disappeared, and she's blocking something out in her mind. It's something that her mind actually censors her from ever knowing because the truth is so traumatic. So this kind of job is her psychological way of trying to, what she believes is her way of trying to protect people. And it's interesting, the deeper it goes into it and the more disconnected from reality she becomes, because by the end of the movie, she's convinced that this actress from the film is her long lost sister, so much so that she shows up on set, causes a scene, and takes her back. And at the end, she believes that everything is all beautiful now, that crime is completely dropped in the streets now, that video nasties are not a thing anymore, and all these things disappeared. Only underneath it, something ugly is actually really going on. And you realize that it's her just projecting it. And it's kind of a sarcastic way to kind of say, yeah, taking bad movies off the market is going to solve crime in the UK and all that, because these video nasties were a big target from UK censorship. And I really like the ending of this film. I like the last 15 minutes with them using kind of the VHS effects to kind of blur the lines between fiction and reality. I enjoyed this film a lot, and I really enjoyed the main performance by Naeem Algar. I think she gave a very good performance in this film. I think it's very aesthetically pleasing too.
Well, I need to watch this one again because I felt stupid about halfway through it because I got completely lost and I never was able to grasp what was going on all the way up to the end. It got too weird for me. It dipped into like her psychosis, and
Really
you were kind of living her psychosis, and I was like, oh, shit, what's going on?
See, okay, so here's another interesting thing about this movie. It's a little bit hard to explain. Is there's only a handful of small handful of movies that I like. Of all the horror movies I watched in 2021 that I've watched more than once, this one I actually watched twice. I had to watch this twice to completely grasp everything that was going on. And if you notice, kind of at the end of the film, there's something going on where it seems like all crime in Britain has been solved because video nasties are off the market. But if you pay close attention, there's quick flashes of reality of what's really going on. The girl who looks peaceful in the car actually looks horrified. When she's taking to the girl to her parents saying, "Hey, I returned the child," it projects this video image quality of a perfect thing happening, but it's censoring the reality of the horror of what she just, which I'm not going to ruin what she just did, but it's kind of, I don't know, in a way it is sort of kind of mocking her belief that censoring films is going to solve reality's problems, and it kind of reveals that she's a very damaged person who is just projecting her own ideas onto censorship, that she believes that since she mentally blocks things out, this is how her mind protects itself from the truth of what happened the day her sister disappeared, because she can't remember, she's blacked it out. That's what keeps her mentally sane. I think we all do that sometimes for things that are too traumatic. We block it out. So she believes by censoring these films, these video nasties, she's actually protecting the public the way that she's really protecting herself. She's projecting her own mental hangups onto what's going on.
So if I would have realized it was still exploring censorship, I would have grasped it much better.
Yeah,
because I didn't know. I knew that I loved the way they were exploring it about halfway through it, and then when it started getting more surreal, I didn't realize they were still exploring censorship at that time.
Yeah,
Okay.
The whole thing is about the idea of censoring films and taking them off the streets and what good that's actually going to do. And very interesting. And like I said, I think most horror films about a censor would make them a lot more unsympathetic just because we don't really like those people. And I'm glad this movie didn't, because I think that would have been the easier characterization, like the easy thing to do. It gave us a little bit more of a complex character where she's not really a bad person, and you can even see her point of view to an extent, even though she's wrong. But
Yeah.
even so, when she's censoring things, it's still not enough, and she gets death threats and all kinds of stuff. So it's a very, very interesting film. Very much reflecting on like that, like the conservative '80s and the crackdown on censorship and on violent film and things like that. I thought that was an interesting like milieu for a horror movie.
It's pretty maddening what she has to go through as a censor, and it kind of makes me understand why the MPAA keeps their identities secret.
Yeah, I can get why, but yeah, I watched it twice just to grasp everything that was going on in it. It's one of those movies that I did have to see more than once. But yeah,
Okay.
I love this film.
So I'll have to watch that again, because already it sounds like I would have enjoyed it more if I would have understood that.
Yeah, and the things happen so quick, the glimpses into reality, that like you realize this is her projected fantasy, and there's like really quick flashes that sometimes you have to see it twice and just zone out on the scene, and you'll notice that you'll see them traveling together in the car all happy, and then it'll flash quick what's really going on, completely different color palette, and the girl looks horrified and scared out of her mind.
That's cool. So that's why they were doing that. Damn.
Yeah, but yeah, I was totally impressed by this movie. For me, it was just uh, good use of the horror elements and everything, but it's not one of the scariest movies of the year. To me, it was one of the most like original and thought-provoking and something different.
Yeah, so many cool ideas going on in horror films this year.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of Censor.
All right, so that brings us to my number 3.
Yes, sir.
My number 3 is a French Christmas horror film, The Advent Calendar. It's written and directed by Patrick Reidermont. He's an actor turned director, and this is only his second feature. Very impressive. It stars Eugenie Dorand as Eva, Honorine Maginer as Sophie, her friend, Clement Oliveri as William, and Janice Abrick as Antoine. It's about a paraplegic Eva is given a strange advent calendar by her friend Sophie on her birthday. Once she starts opening the drawers, people around her start dying in increasingly gruesome and horrific ways. If she doesn't open every drawer, she will die. If she opens all of them, she can walk again. I thought this one, especially Eugenie Dorand, really carries this film with some very convincing acting as she goes through just a whole gamut of emotions, a gamut of horrific scenes, of dramatic scenes. She goes through all of it. The kills are really well crafted and creative with a wide variety of scares. I love a wide variety of scares where it's a whole bag of different little tricks this little advent calendar has to frighten her and freak her out. And the ideas it uses for these kills is just awesome. I loved every minute of it. It reminds me of Anything for Jackson. Anything for Jackson had that wide variety of scares, but this feels a little more focused than that one did.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this is a new Christmas horror staple, and it's available on Shudder and AMC Plus.
I didn't even know that you liked this one that much. Yeah, this is a good movie. I like this. This is another one. Fell kind of outside my honorable mentions, but yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was a pretty original one, and I love Christmas horror, and this is probably the most original Christmas horror movie I've seen in a while. Because most Christmas horror movies revolve around somebody dressed up as Santa Claus becoming psychotic, and that's usually the only angle that's explored in Christmas. You have like small exceptions, like All the Creatures Are Stirring or something like that. But this is probably the most original Christmas film I've seen, Christmas horror film I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, it takes that high concept of an advent calendar and adds even more creativity to it with the variety of kills, and where you never know what you're going to get when she opens another one of those drawers.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
So that's my number 3, the advent calendar.
All right, so now that I'm into my top 3, I have to say this was extremely hard for me to rank these top 3, and I kind of surprised myself at where everything fell, but these were not easy decisions. So number 3 for me, I almost had it at one point, is Malignant by James Wan. Okay, synopsis is Madison is paralyzed by shocking visions of grisly murders, and her torment worsens as she discovers that 3 waking dreams are in fact terrifying realities. I love this movie. I'm glad that I got to see this on a big screen with a big audience who didn't understand what the fuck was going on half the time. People coming in here expecting another Insidious or The Conjuring, and this was like James Wan reward for all the for doing these are good movies, the Aquaman movies and his Fast and the Furious, and kickstarting the Conjuring universe, which is those are all blockbuster films now at this point. He's a big blockbuster filmmaker now, so this was like his reward where he could do whatever he wanted on the studio's dime, and they couldn't protest anything, and he came up with this fucking zany ass wild horror movie. It's a tribute to films like to exploitation films, to giallo films, to like Euro horror, to slasher. Filtered through his own sensibilities, he brings his very unique style to the proceedings. Very stylized camera work, performances. Probably the coolest weapon I've seen in a horror film in a very, very long time. The knife that they have here is beautiful. It's exciting. It's funny. It's thrilling. It's campy. It's gory. It's whacked out. It goes to really crazy places, and it's just a film that has balls. That James Wan spent studio dollars to make a big budget, zany exploitation tribute to all kinds of different elements of horror, and a total blast. I think for horror fans, I think a lot of mainstream audiences didn't get it. But I think if you're a horror fan and if you're like us and you're a big appreciator of the history and especially of a lot of Euro horror, you definitely have to check it out. Great kills, originality, style, fun. It's fun. It's a blast from start to finish. I love Malignant, and it was actually number 1 on my list, but I kept shuffling them around. It was difficult, so here it is.
Yeah, for me, it felt like a gift for hardcore James Wan fans like me, especially for someone who also loves giallo films, and his other, borderline exploitation film, Death Sentence. So it just felt like a gift for me because I was so disappointed when even though I liked Aquaman, and Fast and the Furious was good for what it was, mostly because it was James Wan.
Would you say was Aquaman better than Fast and the Furious?
Yeah,
okay.
because he kind of he didn't make a James Wan film in the Fast and the Furious universe. He made a Fast and the Furious in the Fast and the Furious universe. So he had all that cheesy melodrama that they always have in the movies, but but he just made it the best of that it could be for what it is.
Mhm.
But I was so disappointed when he went and done those blockbusters. I didn't think he was even going to come back to horror. And the fact that he comes back and does something so completely different than what you're used to seeing from him, it was just perfection for me on all fronts.
Oh yeah, this is a great movie, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be like a big cult horror film in the years to come. I'm pretty sure people are going to be talking about this for a long time.
And all the mini haters are going to change their mind over the next 10 years, I bet.
Oh yeah, I bet they will too.
Because I think it was just so wholly unexpected that it just blindsided everyone.
Definitely. I mean, I knew what I was in for the moment I heard that campy delivery of "Let's cut this cancer out of her." I was like, "Oh, I know where this is going." But
Yeah, I got excited right away, and it did not disappoint all the way to the end. When I bring up my number two, you're going to know what my number one is. My number two is Last Night in Soho.
okay,
So,
you want to do this together because my number two is Last Night in Soho.
okay.
All right, so
So
you go through what you're gonna say though.
just a pitch perfect movie for me in every way. An excellent horror film, written and directed by Edgar Wright. Of course, he did Shaun of the Dead and Baby Driver, another really well crafted film. Co-written by Christy Wilson Cairns, who did the Penny Dreadful TV show, and she also wrote 1917. It stars Thomasin McKenzie in an awesome performance. She was also in Old, I mentioned that earlier, and Jojo Rabbit. She plays Eloise, and Anya Taylor-Joy is back and plays from The Witch and plays Sandy. Matt Smith as Jack is really good, and of course Diana Rigg steals the show as from Game of Thrones and going way back to the Avengers. She was star of the Avengers TV show. She steals the show as Miss Collins. It's about an aspiring young fashion designer rents a room in an old house where she starts having visions of living the life of a dazzlingly beautiful wannabe singer who lived there. What starts as glamorous dreams of the past start to crack and splinter into something darker as the sinister truth is revealed. This is another one like Titan, which bombards the senses, but I thought this one was much more focused and fantastical at the same time. It was literally breathtaking for me. I said that when I first watched it. A lot of people say that that a movie is breathtaking when they watched it, but it literally took my breath away. There was at least 3 or 4 times where I forgot to breathe while I was watching the scene because I was so in awe of just the craft of it and the emotion that went into it and the passion. You could just see it dripping from every scene. The surreal drama, it's just surreal drama horror perfection for me that is undeniably well crafted. And the horror and the mystery are woven into the story perfectly. It's got these dreamy, surreal sequences and a lot of it is done practical in camera. And you can really feel the authenticity of it. It's got an energy and flow that feels both it choreographed and chaotic at the same time. And I love that about it. It's just an ebb and flow of horror perfection for me. So Last Night in Soho is my number two.
So yeah, that's my number two as well. Last Night in Soho. Uh, it's spectacular. It's beautiful. It's absorbing. It's a complete work of art from top to bottom. It is, like you said, breathtaking is I think a justified word to use to describe it, because it has some of the most beautiful cinematography and camera work going on, and you kind of plugs you into the what it must have felt like, the dizzying excitement of London in the swinging 60s and what must have been like to have been there. The neon lights that are kind of offsetting the gray dull that people usually associate with London, and you get to see what really brings the city to life. Also, with regards to the 60s, I think it also, aside from the fact that you get the excitement of the 60s, I think it says a lot about the way that we romanticize the past to kind of fit the mythologies that we built in our head, when the reality is the further you go into the past, the worse progress is, and so it's typically a worse era to be in. So you get to appreciate the beauty and the music of the 60s while also understanding that it's cool to have nostalgia for that, but let's not forget that there's a lot of things that were not right in the 1960s, and there's a reason society was going through a lot of upheaval, and things had to change. So I think it does a good job of kind of de-romanticizing the 1960s while also showing how exciting it was at the same time.
Yeah, and that the way the narrative just effortlessly twists around,
Yeah.
and things you thought in the beginning are completely turned on their heads, and it's something completely different than you thought it was.
Yeah. The camera work is so damn beautiful and so inventive. The way that it mirrors the characters of Sandy and Eloise as one person in the mirror,
Yeah.
seamless and all done in camera. Mind blowing to me that they did that good. Oh man. Both the performances are incredible. You said this about Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so I'm kind of borrowing your phrase. Anya Taylor-Joy just floats through this movie like an angel,
Mhm.
and it's weird. Like she's gorgeous. She is so fucking beautiful, dude, and the camera just loves her too. Like you could tell when she goes on, and like she's beautiful and elegant in a way that's befitting of a film whose style is already beautiful and elegant. So of course you would put somebody like that as the center. And I think Thomas and Mackenzie actually kind of matches her, especially when she morphs in. I mean, it's a much different character, much more withdrawn character who you see her come into her own. It's very easy to root for. You feel bad for her. Very naive country girl coming to the big city at first and not understanding what the hell she's going to get herself into, and then seeing me, the tough thing, like the reality of city life. And as she starts to like emulate the style of the past, as she starts to emulate, who is it, Sandy, Sandy style, she starts to become even more beautiful and gorgeous, and she really comes into her own, and she kind of matches her all the way through. And I think they're both two great dual lead performances. Thomas and Mackenzie is more of the lead, or I would say that Anya Taylor-Joy is like a more of a subservient co-lead, but I think they're both fantastic performances as well. And we haven't even, this is without even talking about the horror of it. I'm just gushing over the beauty of the film and the filmmaking skill and all the camera tricks and the acting. The horror is incredible too. It's great.
But the rest of the film is so beautiful, it makes the horror more jarring for me.
Yeah, I think so too. It's more jarring, it's more shocking, but it's still filmed beautifully. This is another film like the third film in my top 10. The three films of my top 10 are this, Malignant, and The Last Matinee, that all have heavy Giallo influences in it. This reminds me a lot of Giallo films, and you could tell that Edgar Wright is going for that type of visual aesthetic, the beautiful gore, the beautiful camera work, the balletic camera work, everything about it. And it's just a great story. I mean, some people will say the end is predictable, and maybe it is. I don't know. I didn't predict it, but maybe it is predictable. But I don't think even if I did predict it, it would really change because it doesn't really rely on it. I don't really think. I love the movie regardless. It has nothing to do with the ending or
Yeah,
what actually was going on.
yeah, there was so many things I loved about it besides the twist. So that even if I had guessed it, which I didn't either,
Mhm.
it wouldn't have ruined it for me at all.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great horror film. Beautiful to look at. It's a work of art. I love Edgar Wright. You could see him continuously evolving as a filmmaker. Um, Great big splash way to return to the horror genre because he hasn't done anything in the horror since Shaun of the Dead, and he comes back and does nothing like Shaun of the Dead. His original one was more like Romero influenced and more of the zombie B movies. Now he's coming back with more of a European giallo murder mystery flavor.
He's such a refreshing type of filmmaker, and unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to come up with next. Like, it, if you'd have told me that Shaun of the Dead and Last Night in Soho were made by the same filmmaker and I didn't know it, I'd call you a liar.
I mean, if I think about that, then throw Scott Pilgrim versus the World into there.
Yeah,
Nothing like either of those. Maybe, and then if you throw Baby Driver, it's nothing like any of those other ones.
and it's like Baby Driver, only in just how finely crafted it is, like
I
down
think that's
to
where the similarities end, though.
exactly, yeah. Because it seems so meticulous, just like every scene. Like I keep watching movies like this, especially from Edgar Wright, and I expect them to fall apart at any minute. It literally never does.
Yeah,
And
fantastic film.
and rest in peace, Diana Rigg.
Rest in peace.
Because I loved her in Game of Thrones, and I couldn't even believe when I found out it was that beautiful woman from the Avengers. I couldn't believe it was her. But man, she stole the show in Game of Thrones, and she steals the show here. And it was hard to steal the show from those other two ladies in this.
Yeah, I love this movie.
And this was her last movie before she died. So rest in peace, Diana Rigg. And without further ado, we have our number ones. And if you didn't guess by my last pick, which was Last Night in Soho, my number one is Malignant.
Yeah.
The moment I watched this movie, I knew it was going to be my favorite horror film of the year. When I saw Advent Calendar and I saw Last Night in Soho, I thought maybe they were going to edge it out, but I went back and watched Malignant again. It's so damn good on rewatches, and the impact of it never dissipates no matter how many times you watch it. I think I've watched it like 5 times now. And the 5th time I watched it, I was just as excited and giddy as the first time I watched it. That's why I had to pick this one. Of course, directed by James Wan, written by Akilah Cooper. The story is by James Wan, Ingrid Basu, which is his girlfriend, and Akilah Cooper. Excellent performances by Annabelle Wallis as Madison. Yes, every bit of the acting performances are deliberate in this. Maddie Hassan as Sydney, the sister. I loved her in it. George Young and Nicole Brianna White as the cops, Kakoa Shaw and Regina Moss. I love them. They were great cops in this one. Jacqueline McKenzie as Dr. Florence Weaver, who says, "We've got to cut out the cancer." Yep. She deserves mentioning for that line alone. And then, of course, Marina Mazepa as Gabriel. It was a completely unexpected, and that's what I love seeing from a filmmaker like James Wan, something unexpected. Completely unexpected homage to Giallos, which I love. It's exciting. It's over the top. The action, the style, the atmosphere, the camera work, the locations, the set pieces, the lighting, everything for me was on point. It was one of my favorite horror directors, exploring territory that he only touched on in Death Sentence. And man, did he perfect it here. I thought it was something truly different and surprising, and the impact doesn't dissipate no matter how many times you watch it. The women in prison scene with Zoe Bell, the police precinct massacre with the awesome contortionist, the chase through the streets of Seattle with Kakoa Shaw, the shifting realities, the whole dynamic of that, the killer with the huge dagger that he kind of makes himself out of a trophy, and how you kind of hint at seeing it throughout before he makes it into a weapon. The whole lair in the attic, the visuals, everything about it, I just fell in love with it, and it's definitely my favorite horror film of the year is Malignant.
Yeah, like I said, it was my number 3. It's kind of hard. It was kind of hard. They're almost interchangeable, but not quite. But it's a total blast. I mean, you already heard what I had to say with that. It's a total blast. It's a great movie. I think it's definitely a horror classic that people are going to be talking about for years. And
Yeah,
it was a great time at the movies for me. Great choice.
great to see on the big screen as well.
Yep. So my number 1 surprised me because when I first watched it, it was definitely going to be in my top 10, but I did not think it was going to be number 1 because initially there was movies I liked more. But the more I talked, the more I sat on it, and the more I thought about it, it started to linger in my brain. I kept thinking about it that night, and when I went to sleep, and it was in my head the next day. It is The Medium, which we
Yes,
discussed earlier. South Korean, Thailand co-production. This movie, we discussed it a little bit earlier. It's a found footage film about a documentary crew who is talking to a shaman, and you get to know her family, and it's just filmed like a documentary. That's one of the things that kind of like grounds you in the sense of realism. And you see that one of her family members is possessed, and when it happens, it feels like you're there. You're just watching something happen. It doesn't feel like typical found footage where you're aware all the time, for one, because it's supposed to be made by a documentary crew. It just is the horror film of that most this year of 2021 that most plugged me into the horror of it. It develops at a very good pace. I wouldn't call it a slow burn, but it's definitely not a film that's in a rush to reveal all its cards. I like the constant buildup, the sense of realism, the location, the locale filming in Thailand. I don't really see too many films from Thailand, so it's kind of a nice atmosphere to get. You learn a lot about their cultures and customs and different ideas of shamanism that I was not really aware of. And the horror escalates worse, and it gets worse and worse as it goes along. And like it's like a 2-hour movie, and the 90-minute point, a shocking event happens that just throws you completely off. You're like, what? And the last 30, 40 minutes of this movie are some of the most intense, twisted, evil, mean-spirited, and uncompromising chunks of horror I've ever seen. And the movie was already scary and disturbing up to that point. There's one part, animal cruelty that actually really got under my skin and really made me feel like disturb me. Something that happens with the baby as well. And you think that like you've experienced the extent of how crazy this is going to unfold, and then it gets worse as they get closer to performing this ritual to cleanse the shaman's niece of whatever is possessing her. Everything goes completely haywire. It feels doomed. It feels fucked from the start is the thing about this. It feels like nothing is ever going to go right. Nothing goes right. It's bleak, and it is like a complete triumph of darkness and evil. And then the last scene that comes through is emotionally a sucker punch after you've been taken through the ringer that leaves everything about the positive, even like the most positive things that you try to take away from the film are thrown in doubt, and you're left with, and it was already despairing and uncompromising to begin with, but that last scene is the emotional sucker punch that pulls it all together. Very unpredictable movie, the most bleak, hopeless horror movie I've seen in a long time. Yeah, I loved it. The medium. I think this is just top tier horror film. And the more I think about it, the more I like it. The more nothing stuck in my head or haunted me to the extent. I think there might have been films that were possibly better films. Maybe *Malignant* and *Last Night in Soho* are probably more finely crafted pieces of art. But
Yeah.
this one is the most immediate, like the most, as a horror movie, it's the one that most jolted my system, the one that really plugged me into the awfulness. And then when it was like one of those horror movies that when it was over, I watched it by myself, I said to myself, damn, that's a horror movie right there.
Yeah, and the acting makes it so engrossing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you feel that they're real sisters, and you feel the whole family dynamic, and you feel like these are real people, and there's so many subtleties in their acting and everything too. It's almost like they don't even realize the camera is on them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It
Exactly.
just seems like they're living their lives and really experiencing this evil. And I love stories like this where it's just like relentless evil, where there's like 2 or 3 characters that pop up throughout the movie that you think, okay, this is going to be a formidable opponent for this demon, and this demon just ravages everyone that comes in its path, and it's just hopeless. And it just ends so hopeless, but that's the nature of evil if you're dealing with something as powerful as that. And they really set up the story to make you feel how powerful that evil is.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is the movie kind of ends, and the ending is already wrong and bleak and kind of nihilistic. And then we get one last thing at the end, and I'm not going to say it happens, but one more, like an unseen interview with the shaman, the main character, a little confession of hers. And after all the horror, it's pulls the rug out under you. It's heartbreaking. It's like that one last thing where it's like, you thought we fucked you up. Now we're gonna destroy your emotions right now too.
Yeah.
Ballsy, in such a ballsy horror movie. Yeah, it's very intense. Such an intensity to it, and it's available on Shudder, and it's a Shudder exclusive. And I'm glad that they picked this up because it's fantastic, and I think more people need to see this. I feel like if you want to be like scared by a horror movie, like truly scared, not just have a good time or see like a great horror, but one that's actually going to fucking get under your skin, this is something that you should definitely check out.
Yeah, it's movies like Medium is why you should get Shudder, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't get them anywhere else. It's only there. Just the way they curate these movies and find them from every country all over the world, and they're almost always impressive. I'd say a big percentage of the 52 movies that I enjoyed this year were on Shudder.
Yeah, I fantastic movie.
And a lot of them, especially the horror ones, I mean the foreign ones, are exclusive to Shudder.
I'm glad they picked him up because what I noticed is there's a ton of great foreign horror on here. I mean, think about I forgot what country The Columnist was from. I thought The Columnist was going to be a top 10 for me when I saw it. It didn't even make my honorable mentions.
Me too. Same here.
Yeah. And I was like, well,
The
what happened? I was pretty sure that movie was going to be prominent in it, and it didn't even make it. And I like that movie a lot.
the Columnist and The Stylist, I thought were both going to make it in.
Oh, here's another thing. The Stylist was my number 16, so it actually fell directly the one spot removed from my honorable mentions because we restricted it to 5 because I have it organized. I have my whole list organized. All over 60 horror films I saw for 2021 ranked from top to bottom. But I was like, that fell just outside of my honorable mentions was The Stylist. I thought that was an excellent movie too. Very disturbing.
Yeah, I didn't even put any that I didn't like. I only listed horror movies that I liked, and it's 52 of them. So if anybody wants to check out all 52 movies that I liked this year, check out on Letterboxd. I'm under Horror Show Mike.
Check me out under James Rivera 90. I haven't made that list public yet, but I will after I publish this podcast.
And James is so much better. James has a much more entertaining letterbox than I do. Mine's a mess. James is all organized.
Oh, I jump on everything. So one more quick thing about the medium that I forgot to mention. It was written by Chantavit Danasivi and Na Hong Jin, and this is the writing team that was responsible for The Wailing, South Korean film, and I love that. That's one of my favorite horror movies of the past 10 years. So talent right there.
Yeah, and the medium, I'm telling you, it's going to go down in history as one of the best found footage movies ever, because found footage movies just don't get that engrossing and that effective and that emotional too.
I mean, I think one of the things that helps is that it doesn't really feel like you're watching a found footage horror film while you're watching the medium.
No, you're like watching their lives. And I think I told you before, when the cameramen show themselves, you're like, oh, well, yeah, I forgot there was cameramen back there that are part of the movie.
Yeah. And let me see something. Okay, just so because I want to have I just want to have my information correct. Only one of the writers is responsible for The Wailing. Na Hong Jin, co-writer of this film, also wrote and directed The Wailing.
So I'm gonna watch everything that person does from now on. Jeez.
Na Hong Jin. Yeah.
The Wailing is pretty epic too.
Yeah. I mean, the medium is not as large in scale as the Wailing is. That's even a grander scale film. But this movie was insane, like a true blue horror movie.
And you're not gonna get a more atypical possession film either. It's like no other possession film you've ever seen.
Yeah, loved it. So yeah, follow us on our Letterboxd. Is what's yours? Horror Show Mike.
Yeah.
That's Horror Show Mike. Mine's is very simple, James Rivera 90. Follow us on our social media. Check out our Instagram, which is at The Horror Show Pictures. Correct?
Yeah.
At The Horror Show Pictures. A lot of cool stuff on our Instagram. Check us out on Facebook. That's where you probably get the most information about the projects we're working on, the film projects we're working on, the films that are going to be in production, things that we've done. That's facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. And you can also check out our TikTok page, which is at Horror Show Official on TikTok. And that'll give you a sample of a lot of the stuff that we do, as well as other things, as well as a variety of other things.
And visit our social media where we have all news and stuff coming up. And if we have a guest coming up and we have them scheduled, then we'll post it where they're going to be on the show, and the fans can send us questions and stuff that they want us to ask them, so you can be part of the show. And if you have any requests of what movies you want us to review or anything like that, just send them our way. And we also have a Facebook group. It's Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show Podcast group.
Yes.
So then you can go on there and post stuff that you like. Tell us we're full of shit, whatever you want.
Perfect. Till next week, folks.
Happy horror.